In this second part of the talk on Carers and Social Services and Wellbeing Act in Wales, we focus more on the specific duties to assess carers and to provide support for carers. As we've noted in the first section, the Act places a duty on social services to promote the well-being of carers who need support, to assess the needs of carers, that could be adult carers, young carers and parent carers, and to assess the extent to which carers are willing and able to provide and continue to provide care. And where a carer is assessed as being eligible for support, then there's a duty to meet their needs. Previously, there was only a power. Now, the assessed needs of carers have to be met. There's some important, perhaps subtle legal points that need to be taken on board. First, technically, carers don't have to ask to be assessed. The local authority should assess them as soon as they are aware that they have a caring role. And of course, if a social services authority is assessing a disabled person because they have needs and they know there is a carer, then that should trigger the duty to assess the carer. The carer shouldn't have to write a formal letter or make a formal request to be assessed. It should happen automatically. And carers don't have to establish that they're providing regular or substantial care. Any care that the carer provides on an unpaid basis is sufficient to entitle them to a carer's assessment. And as I've already said, that once the carer has been assessed as having eligible needs, then the local authority is under duty to meet that need. They could meet that need by providing support for the carers, but more commonly, that need will be addressed by providing additional services to the disabled person so that the carer can, for example, have a break. And these duties are owed not just to adult carers caring for adults, but also adult carers caring for children, and also young carers, people under 18, caring for others, perhaps siblings or their parents. Now, we have therefore two duties to assess, one under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act towards disabled people, and another duty to assess carers. Now, those two assessments can be combined. If they concern an adult carer and an adult disabled person, they can only be combined if both the adult carer and the adult disabled person agree. Otherwise, they should be discrete and separate. If it's an adult caring for a disabled child under 16, then the same principle applies, although local authorities can make a decision that they will combine them whether the parent agrees or not. That's not entirely clear in the legislation, I should say, or in the guidance. And I think the principle we should take away from that is that this is a discretion. Local authorities may, in certain situations, be able to have separate assessments, but they can't have a policy of we will always combine assessments, which seems in some situations to be the case. Parent carers can say, look, it's essential that I have a separate assessment because I need to work. I need to work financially. I need to work because emotionally and socially I can't cope unless I have some space. And simply telling me that it's in the best interest of the child that I don't work doesn't really help because that doesn't pay the bills. The reality is that I need to go out to work. So I need a separate statement looking at my needs from those of the children. Obviously, I have the child's best interest at heart, but I don't have an infinite amount of choices. So local authorities will have to act flexibly, and a rigid policy that we always combine parent care assessments and disabled children's assessment would be an unlawful fettering of their discretion. a major issue we have to look at, and I'm not going to go into any great detail, is what do we mean by care? Any care is sufficient to entitle a carer to an assessment, care for a disabled person, an adult or a child, as long as it's unpaid. But what do we mean by care? I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but it's quite clear from the legislation, from the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, that care isn't just physical and practical caring, that it includes emotional caring. And indeed, some of the most challenging caring is caring for somebody with a mental health problem. And as previous guidance issued by the Welsh Government has said, that many carers may not be physically or practically caring at all at certain times, but still be anxious and stressed, waiting for, actively seeking to prevent the next crisis. That is sort of 24-hour, 7 days a week anxiety and stress. And that has a huge impact. And it's incredibly important, of course, for the disabled person that there is somebody there supporting them emotionally. That is care. And the principal thing that we have to take away from the obligations under the Act is there is no duty in law in Wales, or indeed in the United Kingdom, for carers to provide care. We abolished the liable family rule, which placed a duty on families to care for family members. We abolished that in 1948 on the 5th of July, when the National Assistance Act came into force, and it repealed the poor laws which had that provision. And so councils mustn't assume that a carer is able or willing to provide care. And when undertaking an assessment, they must assess the impact on the carer's well-being, their emotional well-being, their physical well-being, their well-being in terms of being able to access work, leisure, training, education, having a social life, forming social relationships, contributing to the community. All those aspects of well-being must be recorded on the carer's assessment, as well as what outcomes, what aspirations the carer wishes in their day-to-day life. Those must be recorded, and the carer should be put in a position of having an ordinary life like everybody else who doesn't live with caring responsibilities or with impairments. And as I've said, this must be recorded explicitly. Now, even though we haven't had a duty to provide care for family members since 1948, culturally that sort of obligation still exists, particularly gendered, in the sense that women are supposed to have these obligations in particular. And it's quite difficult, even though it's not in the law, for families to push back on that and say, look, I'm not willing to provide this. You may want to discharge this person from hospital, but I simply can't provide this care at this stage. Or, you know, I'm quite happy to do this, but I simply can't because I've got work, I've got other commitments. And I think it's much easier when that's being put for the carer to say, look, it's not a question of whether I'm willing. Obviously I'm willing, but I'm simply unable to provide this care. Willingness is a really interesting idea, but I am simply physically, emotionally unable to provide the care unless you as a local authority accept that you will provide, you will hold this person to be eligible. If they're eligible and you put together a care package, then it may well be that I will be able to contribute to that. But unless you as an authority accept this person as eligible, I'm simply going to be unable to continue to provide care. It's not a question about willingness, it's a question about ability. And the code is very strong on this. It says in making a determination of eligibility there should not be an over-reliance on voluntary caring arrangements. Local authorities must ensure the ability of a carer to provide care is sustainable and that they comply with their general duty to promote the well-being of carers and the person cared for. So we've got some interesting and I think important cases. These are English cases, as I've already said. The English Ombudsman publish all their cases, whereas the Public Service Ombudsman in Wales doesn't. But since the law is the same in the two nations, we're going to, in this section, refer to those published reports which come from England. So this is a report in 2018, and this is a disabled person, an adult, who has a mobility car. His mobility allowances are used to buy a car, which is important for transporting him around. But he himself can't drive, so the vehicle is driven by his parents. And the council assess that he has an eligible need to be in a day centre during the day. And of course, once you've assessed somebody's having an eligible need to have a community-based support service like a day centre, the local authority must also assess how he's going to get there. And the local authority say, well, it's the parents' duty to take him there because there's a mobility car on their front drive. And the parents say, well, we don't actually have the space to do that. We're at work. We can't be at beck and call 24 hours 7 days a week. And in fact, this day centre is basically to give us a break. And if we start driving him there and back, then of course that eats into the period of a break. And the Ombudsman just says quite straightforwardly that that's unlawful for the council to consider that they've got to be the people that drive him to and from a day centre. And they have got to consider the impact on the carer's health and their loss of respite, but also, and I think fundamentally, whether they're willing and able to do this, which they weren't. And there've been a couple of cases on that. There I quote the Nottingham case, and also there's been one concerning Wiltshire. Another, I think, valuable case, a series of cases concerns where a local authority decides that it's going to cut a care package. It has a review and an existing package is then reduced for the disabled person. Now, the Ombudsman in those situations wants to know why the package has been reduced. What's changed to suggest that this disabled person no longer needs so much support? Historically, local authorities could say, well, we've tightened our eligibility criteria because we've got resource problems. But that's not possible anymore because the eligibility criteria are laid down in law. They're not local, and the law hasn't changed since 2016. So the Ombudsman wants to know what's changed. Has the disabled person miraculously got better, or has the carers suddenly become very willing to take on additional caring roles? And if the idea is that the carer is willing to take on the additional roles, then the local authority is going to have that in writing, explicitly clarifying that the carers are now willing and able to assume greater caring responsibilities, and therefore the care package can be cut. And again, there's been a series of cases on that published by the English Ombudsman. Now, local authorities can meet need for carers and disabled people in a variety of ways. They've got to meet the need, but how they meet the need, they can do that by providing support, commissioning it directly from an in-house service or from the private sector, or providing care accommodation, care and support, personal assistance within the home or in community-based services, goods, facilities, direct payments, aids, adaptations, whole range, whole spectrum of support arrangements. And that duty is what we call at law non-resource dependent. Once a need has been identified, it's got to be met, whether it costs £1,000 or £50, it's got to be met. local authorities can only look at the cost if they have two alternative ways of meeting the need. So cost is irrelevant when it comes to meeting the need. It's just simply got to be met. But if there are two ways of meeting the need, the local authority can choose the less expensive if it equally well meets the eligible need. So if a disabled person needs 10 hours sitting service a week, or if the disabled person needs to be in a respite care centre, say once every fortnight to give the carers a break, then it's got to be 10 hours a week or once every fortnight. It can't be 8 hours or once every 3 weeks. The eligible need has got to be met with precision. You can't trim the care package simply because a local authority has resource shortages. Another ombudsman's case, again an English case, I think is valuable here. This is an adult with significant learning disabilities, and he lives with his elderly parents. He himself is in his 50s. And the care package for the family effectively has included 50 days of replacement care every year to enable the parents to have a break. So a couple of days every fortnight, the parents can get away and have a break. And during that period, alternative care is provided to the adult learning disabled son. And for some reason or other, the local authority decide on review to reduce that 50 days replacement care to just 14 days a year. Nothing had changed. In fact, the sustainability of the caring package was recorded by the assessor at risk. The parents were getting elderly and the young man himself was getting older. So there was more fragility within that relationship. But nevertheless, the local authority, some senior members or panel decided to cut it drastically. And not surprisingly, the Ombudsman found that to be unlawful. The local authority had to provide an explanation as to the reasons for the reduction. It needed to show that what the circumstances were that warranted a change of that kind. But the Ombudsman went on to say, I think, a couple of things that I think are very valuable. What he said was that it simply wasn't acceptable for the council to state that it would offer a respite if there was an emergency. The parents' needs for weekends away and a little social life are not emergencies, but part of a planned, sustainable support regime. The council's assessment does not address these sustainable issues. It doesn't address the impact of the carers' daily lives, and their non-caring activities had to be included. Now, the vast majority of support that carers get is delivered to the disabled person through replacement care, respite care, short break care, so that the disabled person has a service that enables the carers to have a break. But local authorities can also provide support services directly to the carer. Unfortunately, the guidance in Wales is pretty well silent on that type of support services. And again, we need to look to the English context where the law is the same, but the statutory guidance is much more explicit. So it gives examples of the sorts of support that could be provided directly to carers. It says that that could include relaxation classes, training on stress management, gym or leisure membership, adult learning development on new skills or refreshing existing skills so that the carer can be able to stay in paid employment or return to paid work. And it could include help with hobbies. It could include, for example, the purchase of a garden shed or a laptop so that the carer can stay in touch with family and friends. So there's a great deal of scope for imaginative support for carers to sustain them in their caring role. One of the types of support that has been mentioned in a High Court case, but has never been the subject of a carer ombudsman's report or a court case where a carer has actually explicitly challenged this, concerns travel expenses. And I'm surprised that this hasn't cropped up more. Many carers are visiting family members who are in residential placements some distance away from them. They may be elderly parents in a residential care home, but as we've seen, particularly during COVID, they may be younger, disabled children, young people with, say, autism and challenging behavior. And we've seen how incredibly important it is that families retain contact, how incredibly important for the well-being of disabled people it is for them to have regular contact with family carers. That's caring, it's emotional caring, and therefore that is an eligible support need. Many carers have to travel long distances to visit their relatives because they've been placed at some distance away by the local authority. And in an English High Court case known as Hurley and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, the Secretary of State conceded that help with those travel expenses would be a service that could be funded under the English Care Act, and so by implication under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act in Wales. So as with disabled people, carers have, once they have an eligible need, a need for support, they have a right to have that support need met by way of a direct payment, rather than the local authority commissioning or securing the services. And we've seen a whole series of cases, again in England, sort of fleshing out what sort of support services could be funded with a direct payment for a carer. So I'm giving you some examples here. We've had a report that the carer needed a break to relax. They wanted to spend their direct payment on bird watching and gardening equipment. Another case where the carer wanted to use their direct payment to purchase some walking equipment and to get out of the house and home, and therefore the direct payment was to cover that hobby. And there are decisions about pet care, very important issue.